Okay, so here's where we left off last time. We have a program that is capable of filling in the board, and when it fills in the board, it can fill that in with blank spaces, breakable tiles, and it's capable of detecting when there's a deadlock, and when there is a deadlock, it'll reshuffle the board. There's a few small errors that I still need to fix, and I'll do another bug fixes episode soon. But for now, since we just covered detecting deadlock and reshuffling the board, I thought it would be a good idea to do something that's related to those two topics, which is giving the player a hint on the board. Because right now, it's kind of hard for me to see where I could possibly move. I know the board isn't deadlocked, but it's not the easiest thing in the world for me to see move. And maybe it's just because I'm bad at these games, who knows. And also, all the shapes are the same. We'll deal with that soon. Oh, here we go. There's a move. So yeah, let's begin by making a new script. So in my script folder, I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this Hint Manager. And I'm going to open that up in Visual Studio. And I'll be right back once that's done, because I didn't have Visual Studio open already. Alright, so first thing I want to do in this Hint Manager class, and I could just put all the logic for this in the board class, but our board class is already getting a bit chunky, so it makes sense to separate this off into its own thing. First thing I'm going to do is make a reference to the board. So I'm going to say private board, and I'll just call it board. And then I need to make references to a couple other objects here. First, I want to make a reference to how long it takes between when the player last moved and when the hint will regenerate. So I'm going to call that a public float hint delay. And I'm not going to use a coroutine for this. I'm going to use a counter in the update method for a few reasons. And I'll explain those when I get to them. But to use a counter along with my float here, I'm going to create a private float, and I'm going to call that hint delay seconds. And this is what's going to be kind of counting down in the background, and once it reaches less than or equal to 0, we'll trigger something. I also want to make a reference to the hint particle. So this is going to be a public game object hint particle. And I want to make another game object that stores the current hit that we have on the board. So this is also going to be public for a reason I'll make clear in a little bit. Game object, and this is going to be current hint. Alright, so I'm going to save this script really quickly here. I'm going to pop back into Unity. I'm going to find my board object. I could attach this to another object in the scene. I could make a hint manager object and attach it to that if I wanted to. I'm just going to attach it to my board and pull my hint manager script in. I'll set my hint delay to something like 3 seconds, but we don't have a particle. So I'm going to go over into my scene view here, kind of scroll off to the side, and I'm going to create a new effect and a new particle system. So by default, this starts with those fuzzy particles, and we've talked about these before, so I'm going to go a little faster now than I did the first time we talked about particles. I just want like a really subtle ring effect that gets larger and then fades out, larger and then fades out. So I'm going to turn off shape, and I'm going to put the start speed down to 0. Let me zoom in a bit here. I'm going to keep the one Unity unit in view so that I can keep that as a reference. I'm going to change the emission to 0 as well, and instead I'm going to add a burst, and I'll bring that count down to 15. Now in my materials, I already, interesting. Okay, in my materials folder, I already have a ring material, so I'm going to drag that onto my particle system here. Alrighty, it's looking better. Now I want it to slowly get bigger, so I'm going to go to size over lifetime, turn that module on. By default it does this linear curve. I want it to kind of ease in, and grab this handle and make it more of a sinusoidal. Now, what's going to happen here is it's going to go from size 0 to size 1, and that 1 is being multiplied by its start size, so it won't get any bigger than the 1 unity unit. I want it to get bigger than that, though, because my dot already takes up quite a bit of this. So I'm going to make this size go up to 3. That's a little too big. Let's do 2. Okay. Now I want to do something similar to the color over lifetime. So color over lifetime, on the bottom will modify the color, and on the top will modify the alpha value. I'm going to add 2 new markers on the top, and then I'm going to change the edges here at the very, very end, and at the other very, very end, down to 0 opacity. Oh, that's weird. Is it because I changed my start lifetime down to 2 and my duration down to 2? Just make the duration 3. It's not really fading like I want it to. Let's bring these a little more towards the center. What do I want to change here? I want it to loop. Let's go back to 5 and 5. It's a little better. For my bursts here, let's see. Yeah, that's probably fine. All right. You can spend forever working on particle systems, and I'm just gonna kind of move on. I'm gonna call this hint particle, and I'm gonna make it prefab by just dragging it into my prefabs folder. And then I can delete this from the scene because I don't need it anymore. I'm going to go to my board, and where it says hint particle, I'm going to drag in that hint particle I just created. So now it has a reference to it. So back in Visual Studio here, I'm going to do a couple things in the start method. First, I'm going to finish my reference to the board. So I'm going to say board equals find object of type board, and I can do it this way because I know I'm only going to ever have one board in the scene that's active at any one time, so I don't have to worry about it finding the wrong object. And then I'm also going to set the hint delay seconds equal to the hint delay. So hint delay seconds is equal to hint delay. All right, cool. I'm not going to do anything in the update method yet, but I'm not going to get rid of it because I am going to use that. Now I'm going to make a few helper methods. So let's just kind of talk out the logic behind this. So first, I want to find all possible matches on the board. So I'm going to have a method that finds all the possible matches. Then I want to pick one of those matches randomly. So I'm going to have a method that does that. Then I want to create the hint behind one of those, behind not one of those, but the chosen match. And then I also need to have a method that destroys the hint. Otherwise, when you start moving pieces, you'll still have that pulsing hint marker behind a piece that you've already moved, and it looks a little weird. So I need another helper method to destroy the hint. Okay. So this is essentially the logic I want to do, broken down piece by piece by piece. Now for this first part, I already have a method in my board class that does something very similar to this. So if we look at the board class, I have a method right here for is deadlocked. And instead of telling me what the matches are. It tells me if there are matches, but it checks everything. So what I want to do is I'm going to copy most of the logic from this. So I'm just going to grab everything that's inside that is deadlocked method. I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to go into my hint manager class, and I'm going to create a new method that I'm going to call, this is going to return a list of game objects, so it's not a void, and find all matches sounds good. And I'll paste my method in there. Now I'll get a bunch of red squigglies that show up right away. And those red squigglies show up because these are variables that aren't defined within this class. So I'm going to change width to board.width, height to board.height, all dots to board.alldots, this to board.width. I'm going to take away the return false values, and I'm going to replace them with something else in just a second here. Same thing with the return true. Make this board.height. Okay, and now if I do board dot, switch, what did I call it? Geez, switch and check. It's not going to let me do that, and the reason why is back in the board class, my switch and check method is private. But if I just change that to public, I'll be fine. So that's public now. Back to hint manager, and yep, that's fine. And board.switch and check. Now, final matches is still red because I'm not returning anything, and this is not a void, so it requires a return statement in it somewhere. So what I'm going to do is create a general list of game objects up here. So list of game objects, and I'm going to call this possible moves is a new list of game objects. Then when I find a match, instead of returning a value, I'm instead going to do possible moves dot add, and I want it to add board dot all dots ij. I'm going to do the same thing in that next if statement, so I'll copy that, paste it here, and then at the very end, because I still need a return statement, I'm just going to return possible moves. So this is a little method that will return all of the pieces that if I switch them with something else will return a match somewhere on the board. So next I want to pick one of these matches randomly. So this is going to be a game object because I want to know what the match is. So this is going to be game object, and I'll call it pick one randomly. And in order to do this, I'm going to take a list of game objects, and I'm going to call this possible moves again. Is a new list of game objects, and I can call it the same thing as I did the other one because these are both local variables. They're not global. I'm not overloading it. So I'm going to then say that possible moves is equal to find all matches. So this creates an empty list of game objects, and this overwrites that empty list with all of the pieces on the board that if I move will result in a match on the board. Next, I'm going to check to make sure that there are some matches on the board somewhere. So if possible moves dot count is greater than 0. So if there are possible moves, then I'm going to choose a random number. So int piece to use random.range, between 0 and possible moves dot count. and then I'm going to return that game object. So I'm going to return possible moves piece to use. And this doesn't get rid of the red squiggle, because what if this if statement's false? And if the if statement is false, I'm going to return null, meaning that there is no possible thing that I can pick randomly from. Okay, so there's two of my helper methods. Let's see, one more. Create the hint behind the chosen match. So I'll call this, this is just going to be a void. So do I need it to be public? I don't think so. So let's do private void mark and, I don't know, mark hint. There we go. So for mark hint, what I want to do is I want to pick one randomly and mark it. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a new game object that I'm going to call move. Game object move is equal to pick one randomly. So that means that I'm going to get something back, and if I don't, then I'll know that I can't mark anything. So if move is not equal to null, meaning if there was something that could be returned, then I'm going to say that current hint is equal to instantiate hint particle, and I want to instantiate it at that moves transform. So moves.transform.position and quaternion.identity. All right, cool. I'm going to throw in one more method here, this last one, to destroy the hint, and we'll come back to that in a second. So we'll call this one needs to be public, destroy hint. And first we want to check to see if current hint is null. So if current hint is not equal to null, then I want to destroy current hint and set current hint to null, and also reset the timer. So hint delay seconds is equal to hint delay. Okay, cool. Now, how that timer works here, because right now none of this does anything because it's not being called from anywhere. To get that timer to work, in my update method, I'm going to, every frame, subtract from hint delay seconds however much time has passed since the previous frame. And doing that allows you to make the game work the same regardless of how many frames per second your hardware is running. So I'm going to do hint delay seconds minus equals time.delta time. Then I'm going to check to see if hint delay seconds is less than or equal to 0, and if there is no current hint. Current hint double equals null. Oops. Alright, cool. So if that's true, if our hint delay seconds are less than or equal to 0 and we have no current hint, then I want to create that hint marker. So I'm going to call mark hint, and then I'm going to reset hint delay seconds. Hint delay seconds is equal to hint delay. So now, even if it goes underneath 0, it's not going to try to create a new hint because current hint won't be null, hopefully. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to pop back into Unity here and let that think for a second, see if I made any errors, or at least syntax errors. Okay, cool. So I'll hit play. Okay, so I should be able to wait 3 seconds, and there's my hint. It's a bit too big, so if I swap those two pieces, I'll get that. However, that hint never gets destroyed. So ideally what I want to happen is as soon as I click on somewhere on the board, I want my hint to be destroyed, which is why I created that little method to destroy it. So in order to do that, though, I need to call that DestroyHint from somewhere. And it seems like the best way to do that, to know if a dot's been clicked on, is in the dot script. Especially since in the dot script, I already have an onMouseDown method that checks to see if it's been clicked or touched. So I'm going to be using this to destroy the hint. I'm just going to add a quick comment here. And by destroying the hint, I'm resetting the timer, and the hint will come back. It might not come back in the same place, but it'll come back. So up here in my, oh wow, I actually organized these. Okay. So I guess with find matches is a good place to put it. I'm going to do private hint manager, and I'm going to call it hint manager. And then I need to assign that in the start method to complete the reference. Hint manager equals find object of type hint manager. Okay. And then I'm going to go back down to my onMouseDown method right here, destroy the hint. So again, I'm kind of sloppy sometimes. What it would be best to do is, instead of just doing destroy the hint, instead of just doing hint manager dot destroy hint, because you can, but if the hint manager never gets assigned, then this will give you a null reference exception error and kind of break stuff. I'm going to only call this if hint manager is not equal to null, meaning if it did find a hint manager. And even if it's only one line, I like to put my if statements inside braces in case I want to come back later and make it more than one line. I know that's probably bothered more than one of you out there. Okay, if hint manager is not null, destroy hint. So yeah, that should be fine. If we jump back in here, I'm going to let that compile. And when it's ready, I'll hit play. Alright, so we got our delay. We should see hint particle be created over here. It's right there. It's telling me if I swap these two pieces. So, but if I click somewhere, that hint particle got destroyed. And now it's created again 3 seconds later somewhere else. So there you go. And if I wait, sorry for that weird cut. So yeah, the only real thing about the hint system, and you probably notice it by now, is it will tell you about not necessarily the piece that matches the piece that you want to move it to, but just the piece to move. And that's because of the way that I have my deadlock system set up. I personally don't mind this. If you do, there's probably a couple solutions I can think of to it. You could modify the switch and check method to only check if it's the right piece, meaning the piece that matches the other two. But I kind of don't mind how it is. I don't know. I think instead of just telling the person where to move, it gives like an extra layer to it. So yeah. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the description down, or comments down below. You can follow me on Twitter to find out when I post a new video. And I have a Discord that I'll link in the description down below. And I also have a Git for this project that I will link in the description down below. Hope this video finds you well, and have yourself a wonderful day.